Hi again then guys, and welcome to another Special Projects replica build, and this particular replica is actually a requested build of a Group A racing style tune for the 80s shape Supra. Now we are using the premium Supra as the base model. Obviously you do get better visuals on the car regardless of what upgrades you're using on it. And there's always an advantage to have that fully detailed interior if you can. It just makes it more enjoyable to drive. Now you could technically also do this build on the non-premium version as well if you want to. I don't really see why you'd need to do that, but the option is there. You can do most of the things to it, apart from, of course, the race number. Now, there are, of course, a couple of different racing Supras, but the one in particular that I've gone for is the number 51 Supra in the Group A class, driven by a guy called John Smith. It's, I believe, one of the last, if not the last remaining Group A racing Supra Turbo. It didn't do amazingly well against the Skylines, from what I've read, considering the disadvantages that it had in terms of power, but at the same time, it is a very powerful car compared to what it is stock. As you'd expect, you're running around 450 to 500 horsepower. We are giving it the benefit of the doubt and going to the higher end of that spectrum. You could go down to 450 if you want to, but I've also gone up to 500, both because I can, and also because it's more rounded off, PP-wise. So you've got the option there if you want it. Now, as far as the visuals, I was inclined to put the flat floor on the car, because of course it is a race car that we're building at the end of the day, but the flat floor really doesn't look right on this car, especially not without the body kit. And the body kit also doesn't look right. It's not accurate to the real machine. So if you want to fit those things, you can, but it just doesn't look quite right on this vehicle, at least for me personally. You know, as far as the rims, we've gone for BBS RS wheels. They're not exactly the same as the real car, but they're about as close as we can get, because the real car uses very similar wheels to the Calsonic R32 Skyline race car, which we also have on the game, and this would make an interesting rival to that car if you tune them to a similar level. Now, for the colour, the real car is white and red. Of course, we don't have a livery editor, so you can't change that, but I've gone for Scotia White, which is the predominant colour of the car, or white is the predominant colour, and Scotia White comes from the older shape Mitsubishi Evo. You could just go for a Supra White from the other model, but it's down to personal preference. I've also gone for that colour on the wheels, because the real car, again, has white wheels, and for the brakes, I've gone for Ebony Black from the Jaguar S-Type, just to put more of the attention on the rims rather than the brakes. We're running, obviously, the number 51 plate, because that's the real number of the race car, and that's it for the visuals. So we'll, of course, run through the mechanical side of things next, and then, as we always do, take it out to a racetrack to see what it's capable of. Now, as far as the tuning goes, there are some things which we do know, such as the rough power, the rough weight, and the visuals, but there are some things which we don't, such as gear ratios, or suspension settings, or diff settings. Now, you may be able to find those on the net, but I wasn't able to. So if you do have the inside track on that information, or if you know where you can find it, by all means, slap that down in the comments for the benefit of others who want to build this tune. But at the moment we're going more for the broad strokes, the kind of power, the kind of weight, and the kind of look which this car would need to have. Now, I've gone for racing hards, which is kind of overkill, to be honest, on this car, but I did that partially for the visuals. I wanted it to have those slick tyres to get that authentic racing appearance. Likewise with the brakes, you want it to feel like a race car as well. For suspension, you've got a couple of options. The car isn't overly low to the ground, and that's mainly because the wheels fill the arches, so you can't really slam the car that much in racing form, but at the same time it is lowered over the standard Supra. Now, I've done a slight disparity between the front and the back, or I've got a slight disparity I should say, and that's to even out the ride height. Again, you don't have to do that, but I've opted to. So we've gone 10mm higher at the front than at the back, just to even it out a bit, because I personally don't like my cars to have that kind of snowplow appearance. I know some people do like that, but for this car, it's just not really the way the real machine looks. As far as springs, we've increased those quite a bit to 1575 and 1075. You don't necessarily need to go that high, but I would recommend increasing them. As far as dampers, we've increased those to 5. Anti-roll I've left on 3. Again, you can change that if you want to. We've got 1 degree of camber, and that's really totally for the visuals. You don't need camber on this car at all. The handling is really good. If anything, the camber may even make the handling a little bit heavier than it should be. So it depends what you want. I personally don't use camber, as many of you guys know, but I've done it on this car for the same reason as the tyres. To get that authentic look, the real car has a little bit of stance to it, so that's what I wanted to achieve. We've got neutral toe. As far as the gearbox, well, we'll come back to that in just a second actually. As far as the drivetrain, specifically the diff, I've gone for the lowest initial torque, highest settings on both acceleration and braking, but as always, if you already know something that works better for you, by all means go for that, or just mess around with it if you want to try something different for a change. As far as power, we do have an oil change. As I said, the real car is running somewhere between 450 and 500 horsepower. I've took full advantage of that and given it the full 500. If you want to build it to less, of course that's all down to you. Now I've gone for the Stage 2 engine tune, high RPM turbo and the Sports Cat. Then as far as weight, the real car does weigh about 14-20 kilos. It may be a little bit higher or a little bit lower, but according to the guy who actually owns the car, John Smith, that is the weight of the vehicle, around 14-20. So we've gone for a Stage 1 weight reduction. The body, or the bonnet I should say, body coloured bonnet, and that's primarily due to the pins. I wanted it to again have as close to a race car appearance as possible, and I've also gone for the window weight. You don't really have to do that, but I just did it for the sake of it. Then we've added 74 kilos of ballast, again to bring us up to that accurate weight, and I've put that all the way to the back to improve the weight split, because it is a pretty front heavy car. Now finally for the gearbox, as I said, I'm not aware of what the actual ratios of the car are. So, as I said, feel free to slap those down below, but I've opted for a medium ratio gearbox. It's not overly close or overly long. You can get about 185-ish miles per hour out of it, maybe 190 at a push. So, about as much as you need on most tracks. We've gone for an auto setting of 180, then individual gears of 3, 2025, 1525, 1200, 975 and 825 with a final drive of 3.5. So that's it overall for the tune, and there is some room for variation there, certainly as far as the gearbox and suspension, and always with the diff, but all that remains now, of course, is to actually take it out to a racetrack to see if it can pull off being a race car. Now the build on this car is primarily due to the request. As I said, it was a requested build. It's not a car which I would have probably specifically put aside to do, because it just wouldn't have come to mind. But that being said, it does pull off being a race car really well. The actual race car doesn't visually look a huge amount different to the Supra. There are changes, but they're not radically different. It doesn't have ridiculous huge wings and a massive wide body kit or anything like that. It's more of a subtle looking race car, which of course is common of all Group A machines. Now as far as track potential, I mentioned earlier that the camber feels frankly unnecessary on this car. The handling is heavy enough already, so if you want to remove that completely, that's absolutely fine. It doesn't detrimentally affect it at all. I personally probably won't be running camber on it. It's purely for the visuals. So you've definitely got options there. Overall, I'm not going to make any promises that it will dominate the 520 pp level, but it's fun to drive, and it's about as close as I could personally get to the real Group A machine. So I hope you enjoy using this tune overall if you do decide to build it or some variation of it, and of course you can check out more like this at the end of the video in the playlist. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.